Hello and welcome. I'm Jean Buzby, the USDA Food Loss and Waste Liaison. I'm so pleased to have you here for this very exciting event. We are going to hear from leaders in the food waste world about the successful strategies and innovations that they are doing in their own communities to reduce food loss and waste. My hope is that by learning about strategies that are successfully reducing food waste in the United States, London, and Milan, we will be inspired to implement them in our own communities and maybe even make some small changes to reduce our own household food waste. But before we hear from our experts, I have a special treat for you. We are going to share with you a short, high-level video by 3 agency leaders from our federal collaboration to reduce food loss and waste. We'll hear from the Deputy Secretary of the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Joel Bronaugh, and the Administrator of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, Michael Regan, and the Deputy Commissioner for Food Policy and Response from the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, Frank Yiannis. Let's hear what they have to say about their agency's commitments to reducing food waste.
Hi, I'm Joel Bronaugh, Deputy Secretary of the United States Department of Agriculture. In the U.S., it's estimated 30 to 40% of the food produced is lost or wasted along the supply chain. At the retail and consumer levels alone, this tallies up to around $161 billion each year. Put differently, a household of 4 spends on average $1,500 each year on food that ends up uneaten. In 2019, 2 billion people around the world did not have regular access to enough safe and nutritious food. Of that, 690 million people were chronically hungry. With a growing world population and a greater awareness of limited resources, and as we will hear from EPA Administrator Regan, an increasing urgency to address climate change, now is the time to reduce food loss and waste. Reducing food loss and waste makes economic sense. It's the climate smart and the right thing to do. In 2015, the USDA and the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, or the EPA, set a goal for the nation to cut its food loss and waste by 50% by the year 2030. We will need everybody, from businesses involved in processing, transporting, and selling food to consumers who make food decisions every day, to pitch in to meet this ambitious goal. USDA is raising awareness about the benefits of and the need to prevent food loss and waste as the first and best option for farmers, businesses, organizations, and consumers. USDA scientists and their industry and academic partners have developed a range of innovative products to prevent, reduce, or repurpose food that is currently lost or wasted. For example, a clamshell container that maintains optimum humidity and prevents fresh fruit from losing weight during storage, and technology that makes bioplastics from food waste. USDA and the EPA have also created the U.S. Food Loss and Waste 2030 Champions Program to encourage corporations and businesses to commit to reducing food loss and waste in their U.S. operations by 50% by the year 2030. The 35 current members include companies from across the food system, such as food service organization Aramark, hotel industry leaders like Hilton, and delivery and grocery giant Amazon. USDA also has an ongoing interagency partnership with the EPA and the Food and Drug Administration to provide information, spur technology, and encourage everyone, people, organizations, and governments to reduce food loss and waste. For more information about the work we are doing at USDA, I encourage you to visit us online at www.usda.gov/food loss and waste. So with that, let's hear from their agency officials now.
At EPA, we're moving with a sense of urgency to fight climate change. From tackling methane emissions and phasing down HFCs to electrifying our cars and trucks. Another area that's particularly important to addressing the climate crisis is food waste. Food is the most common material found in our landfills. EPA estimates that food waste represents more than 20% of the trash that Americans generate. When food ends up in landfills, it releases methane, a powerful greenhouse gas. Nearly 8% of global greenhouse gas emissions come from food loss and waste. Addressing food waste reduces greenhouse gas emissions, prevents resource losses, and can improve access to nutritious food. That's why EPA is excited to work together with our federal partners, the U.S. Department of Agriculture and the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, to cut food loss and waste in half by 2030. We also recognize the important role that the public and private partnerships play, and we will continue to work with government partners and industry leaders to prevent and reduce food waste across the supply chain. EPA encourages you, individuals, businesses, nonprofits, and governments to prevent food waste, donate excess food to those in need, and recycle food scraps into usable products. Working together, we can reduce food waste throughout the supply chain, help consumers waste less, and tackle climate change at the same time. Please visit our website, epa.gov/reducefoodwaste, to learn more about what you can do.
Imagine going into a grocery store, purchasing 3 bags of food and discarding one of those bags in a garbage can as you leave the store. Does that sound ridiculous? Of course it does. But in essence, that's what happens every day around the world. Every year, 1/3 of all food produced globally, 1.3 billion tons, goes to waste. That's enough food to cover all the land mass from Minnesota to Panama. This waste affects our planet, our communities, and our wallets. Let me share a few examples of what FDA is doing to help minimize food waste and describe some of the ways all of us, working together, can be part of the solution. First, it's critical to support work by industry leaders to create highly efficient food distribution systems. Each day removed from the transport of a perishable food is a day of shelf life we give back to the consumer, which in turn reduces food waste in the home. FDA has been working during the COVID-19 pandemic to help identify potential disruptions in the food supply chain. In fact, we developed a data analytical tool called 21 Forward that tracks areas where COVID-19 could impact food processing and distribution facilities. And we learned during the pandemic that greater food traceability, which is a priority for the FDA, might provide greater transparency to industry and regulators that could help anticipate imbalances in the supply chain and possibly avoid the kind of food waste we saw in the early days of the pandemic. Second, FDA is working with state and local health departments to address obstacles to the safe donation of surplus foods by farmers, manufacturers, retailers, restaurants, and consumer organizations to organizations that help feed those in need. We provide resources on FDA.gov to advise consumers on how to minimize food waste at home while protecting the safety of the foods they serve to their families. And lastly, FDA is working with the food industry to support efforts to standardize voluntary date labeling of foods if the date is simply used for quality and not safety. Research has shown that the many date labels on foods, for example, use by, sell by, expires on, and so forth, that appear on foods today are a source of confusion that is responsible for an estimated 21% of food waste in the home. FDA strongly supports manufacturers' use of the introductory phrase, best of use by, when they choose to apply a quality date label. Research has shown that this phrasing helps consumers understand that the label is on the food to convey quality and not safety, and that the food products do not have to be discarded after that date if they are properly stored. In closing, remember that food is just too important to waste. Together, we can make a difference, reduce food waste, protect the planet, and save people money so they can live better lives. For more information, visit www.fda.gov.
Thank you to both EPA Administrator Regan and FDA Deputy Commissioner Yiannis. Our 3 agencies are committed to reducing food loss and waste. Together, we look forward to working closely with public and private stakeholders, and we will continue to encourage new innovations across the food sector from farm to table.
My pleasure. I'm going to go ahead and introduce Emily Broad Leib, who will be our moderator of our roundtable. Emily Broad Leib is a clinical professor of law and the founding director of the Harvard Law School Food Law and Policy Clinic. This is the first law school clinic in the United States devoted to providing clients with the legal and policy solutions to address health, economic, and environmental challenges to the food system. Emily has a particular focus on policies to reduce food loss and waste, particularly those based here, the laws based here in the United States. But she also has a comparative global project on the national laws of many countries related to food donation. Emily, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Jean, and welcome everyone. I couldn't be more delighted to be here and to be joining, but we have such an amazing panel here today, and I know you're going to be as excited as I am to hear from our speakers. As you heard from Jean, I direct the Food Law and Policy Clinic at Harvard Law School, and the clinic really works across the food system to work on various issues where food law and policy intersect, looking at things like food access, sustainable and equitable food production, and of course, food waste and food recovery. You know, as a lawyer and a law school professor, we really are looking at the ways that law and policy play a very big role in food waste and food recovery. Law can be a barrier sometimes. You know, a lot of our laws and policies were written before we had the focus on food waste that we have today. So sometimes they need to be amended. Law can be a barrier just because it's confusing. So sometimes things are allowed, but without good guidance that helps make it very clear to businesses and nonprofits, that can serve as a barrier. And law can also be a motivator. It can align incentives for, you know, businesses in the private sector, for the public sector, schools, et cetera, to make sure more food makes it to, you know, to be donated or recovered or diverted and not going to the landfill. It's been really incredible to see our these three agencies, the USDA, EPA, and FDA, how much they've accomplished in just the last few years on increasing a focus on food loss and waste. But today we're really going to hear from some local and state examples, really inspirational examples from around here in the US and also from some global partners. And I'm excited to be able to introduce them and moderate some discussion and answer questions about the models that they're using. And really, as Jean said earlier, to inspire all of you to be able to replicate these in your own settings. So I'll just introduce each speaker one by one, and they'll each speak for 10 minutes, and then we'll have time at the end for question and answer. So with that, I'm gonna turn to introduce our first speaker today. I think we have perhaps a slide to introduce. Wonderful, okay. Great. So this is our first speaker, Todd Lawrence, who is the Executive Director for Urban Green Lab in Nashville, Tennessee, which is a nonprofit that teaches communities how to live sustainably. Todd is a native Nashvilleian and spent most of his early career in global public health and community education. And Todd, I'll turn it over to you now.
Emily, thank you so much. And a huge thank you to the USDA, to Jean, and everyone who's joining us on the call today, including my fellow panelists. So I'm here to represent Nashville and talk to you about the Nashville Food Waste Initiative. And I'd like to begin with this picture right here, which I think sums up Nashville for a lot of people. People think of Nashville as, they think of Nashville as country music. We really are the music city. This is a photograph of Jason Isbell at the Ryman Auditorium and his wife there in the background, Amanda Shires on the fiddle. And we have a strong tradition of country music and tourism here in the city. And but I want to tell you about how we're tackling food waste at the same time. A little bit about Nashville, though, before we move forward. We're a southeastern city here in the United States. We're one of the fastest growing economies in the country. In fact, we've grown 15% in our population just over the past decade alone, which is faster than the national average of 6%. So we're really growing quickly. In fact, almost 100 people move to Nashville every single day. Our key industries in Nashville are healthcare. It's a healthcare hub for the country. We also, of course, have a strong music scene, manufacturing, tourism, and hospitality. There are about 700,000 residents just in Nashville alone, mostly white, 17% Black, 7% Hispanic, and there are 20 colleges and universities. And for that reason, we're also known not just as the Music City, but the Athens of the South. Next slide. So I'm the Executive Director for Urban Green Lab. We're a nonprofit based in Nashville, Tennessee, and we teach communities how to live sustainably. We want to make sure that in Nashville and in other cities that sustainable living education is just a part of daily life. We run a variety of programs that organize, train, and connect. We train K through 12 teachers how to teach about sustainability and food waste. We run a number of programs where we coach corporate and nonprofit workplaces how to integrate all issues of sustainability, but including food waste into their programming. We also lead the Nashville Environmental Justice Initiative and the Nashville Food Waste Initiative, which I'm going to tell you more about right now. So I want to tell you a little bit about why Nashville is special when it comes to waste and food waste. And obviously, you know, we suffer from the same problem of wasting 40%, up to 40% of our food every year. But we really have a bigger waste problem than that in Nashville. Nashville generates twice as much garbage as the national average and recycles half as much of it. In fact, we only compost about 6% of all of our waste. So we have an enormous waste challenge in the city. And 2/3 of that waste is generated by workplaces. Meanwhile, 1 in 8 Nashvillians is food insecure, and our 2 largest landfills are about to close cap in the next 10 years. And a lot of those landfills are sited in lower income communities of color. So we have a host of food waste related challenges and broader waste challenges in the city. Next. So the Nashville Food Waste Initiative began in 2015 after the Natural Resources Defense Council, NRDC, produced a number of reports showing the scale of food waste in the country and the power of cities to respond to that challenge. And so, but they chose Nashville for a unique reason. We're not San Francisco, we're not New York, we're not some of these cities that are much farther ahead when it comes to addressing sustainable lifestyles. And so they wanted to experiment with Nashville to see if city-led food waste reduction strategies could be done in a middle of the country city that resembles many of the cities in the Southeast, but throughout the United States. They started with a food waste audit that showed that 30% of our landfill content is food. So we decided to start an initiative here. We set the same national goal of reducing food waste 50% by the year 2030. Our core partners include the Environmental Law Institute. This is Linda Bregan on the left, who really got this off the ground. And a steering committee made of local chefs, food scrap haulers, rescue organizations, community gardeners, gleaners, and metro government and residents alike. And that steering committee meets regularly throughout the year to really guide the direction of our programming. And I also mentioned before we move on here that we had 3 mayors over the past 5 years. And so with all of that political turbulence, we decided to, instead of the Nashville Food Waste Initiative being led by city government, we moved it over to Urban Green Lab, a nonprofit, which was a more evergreen solution to that problem. Next. All right, so now I want to talk to you about the 3 different areas of our programming. We have a multifaceted approach for the Nashville Food Waste Initiative, and one of those areas is policy change and research. And I want to just give you a quick assortment of some of the things we've done to address policy through research. The first thing we did in 2015 was conducted a series of landscape analyses around composting and rescuing surplus food. And that really helped to inform where we are as a city. So we needed to understand the depth of the problem first before we moved on. We've also put forth a compost procurement policy for the city, which is actually a model. You can find that model on the NRDC website and the Urban Green Lab website. And it's meant to compel cities to use compostable material, food scraps first in their groundworks around their government buildings. So this is just an example of some of the work that we've done based on that research. We've also produced a guide for cities to integrate food waste into their climate action plans. And you can find that guide on the Urban Green Lab website and NRDC as well. We help to lead the mayor's sustainability committee. And in 2019, the city passed its first solid waste master plan. And that solid waste master plan can be found online. And it really helped to be a guide for us in how we address wasted food and reach that goal of zero waste by 2050. And finally, we have a Mayor's Food Saver Challenge, a partnership with Mayor Cooper, you can see here in the picture, which is all about asking restaurants to adopt at least 5 food reduction strategies in their own establishments. Next. So the second of our 3 pillars is community mobilization. And we try to bring the right people together at the right time. So I talked to you a moment ago about our steering committee, about 25 different key stakeholders who are part of that. We also collect data every quarter on how people are addressing rescue, recycling, and prevention. We at one point ran a software pilot with Belmont University, Vanderbilt University, and some others to try out Lean Path software and Meal Connect. We have also worked with the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, ILSR, on training our community on how to do community composting. And then finally, we are part at Urban Green Lab of the Southeast Regional Cohort, which is led by NRDC, which brings cities together to all exchange practices on how to reduce wasted food. And last. And then finally, education and training. We follow the food recovery hierarchy, and prevention is always better than the cure. So we focus a lot on how to prevent wasted food in the first place through, for example, our Kitchens to Kitchens program, which trains chefs how to teach their peer chefs to reduce wasted food through videos and other materials. We also train K through 12 teachers how to teach about food waste in the classroom. We have a program called SaveTheFood.com, which is, you can find that online, and that produces a number of materials that anybody can download as billboards or posters or so forth to educate the community. We've worked with the James Beard Foundation to produce a waste to not cooking competition where a series of chefs use only food scraps to compete against each other. And finally, this year, we're putting up 6 wall murals, large painted wall murals all around the city to educate people and inspire them to make a change. Next. So that's the Nashville Food Waste Initiative in a nutshell. You can contact me anytime at todd@urbangreenlab.org, and wishing all of you luck with your own initiatives. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Todd. It was so good to hear about the amazing work going on in Nashville. I'm very excited to introduce our second speaker, which is Josh Kelly. And Josh is the Materials Management Section Chief with the Vermont Agency of Natural Resources, which is part of the he's in the Department of Environmental Conservation. Vermont has a food waste landfill ban, which is called the Universal Recycling Law, that also applies to households. And the Vermont Department of Environmental Conservation is working to educate residents and help them prevent food waste and compost the scraps.
Okay, so on this cover slide, you're seeing some symbols, which are probably very familiar to many people. The recycling chasing arrow symbol is nothing new, but you can note that we have a trash can symbol and a food scrap apple core symbol. These Vermont created, modeling them after symbols that were being used in West Coast cities like San Francisco and Seattle, who had policies in place and programs for food scrap separation, and used these colors and basically these symbols. These are available for download, and there'll be a notation to our website towards the end of my presentation. We basically just created our own and made them open source. So these are on some business websites now. They're being used in multiple forums. But I'm going to talk today about Vermont's Universal Recycling Law, and we can go to the next slide. So in 2012, the Vermont legislature passed a phased-in food waste ban as part of the Universal Recycling Law. And just to note that Vermont is one of 8 states with such laws. I guess the thing that is different in ours is that it's a full food waste ban that does get down to the residential level. But the other 8 states listed here also have similar policies or legislation. The main parts of our law are a requirement that food waste generators must separate food waste if a certified facility is within 20 miles. So that is the beginning part of the law, where it phased in over time at these large generator levels. So anyone producing over 2 tons of food waste per week in 2014 was required to begin separating that from their trash, sending it for these hierarchy of uses you see on the right. And that phased down over 4 years to the 1 ton, half ton, and eventually 1/3 ton levels. And then 3 years later, it was culminated by a complete food waste ban that was implemented statewide. And it was regardless of distance to certified facilities, and it applied to everyone, right down to the household level. The law also required trash facilities and haulers to offer food scrap collection. And that was so that once the material is banned, that there would be convenience in place for collection of these materials. So that it was as convenient to compost something as it was to throw it away. And haulers there was modifications made to the law over time, but essentially trash haulers are only required to offer food scrap collection if another hauler isn't willing to provide it. And we'll talk a little bit about the growth we've seen in that area since the law went into effect. On the right, you see this triangle that is fairly similar to EPA's waste hierarchy, except Vermont put in place its own specific to food waste and other organic materials. And so you note this is, again, very similar to EPA's with source reduction and prevention on the top, food for people, food for animals, and composting and anaerobic digestion on the same level of the hierarchy. The last one, energy recovery, really applies to clean wood. We also, as part of this law, had a ban on clean wood. And so energy recovery would be burning wood for heat or for power, which this hierarchy applies to in statute for that part as well. Next slide. So people always ask why did Vermont do this? How did you get here? And like the rest of the US, Vermont actually is fairly similar. Food waste is the single largest portion by weight, by material type of Vermont's waste, and it's about 20%. You see this pie at the bottom that is organic material. About 20% of the 24% you see there is food and food waste. So that's edible food as well as food scraps. And it is the single largest portion of our waste, and it's about half from our residential sector and half from our commercial sector. You'll note in this pie chart, you see special wastes look like they're 26% larger than the one. Special waste is made up of a host of wastes like furniture, textiles, carpet. So there's a bunch of things that divide up that pie and make it into smaller chunks. But essentially, food waste is the single largest component of Vermont's waste stream. And it produces about an estimated 80,000 tons of waste per year in our state. We ran those figures in a side-by-side comparison of composting it versus landfilling it. And the greenhouse gas reductions using the EPA's WARM model is similar to taking over 9,500 vehicles off the road each year. So that's the impact of composting our food waste in Vermont rather than landfilling it. And we'll talk also about some of the higher benefits that are even more impactful to greenhouse gas emissions as they go up the chain in prevention. Let's go to the next slide. So what have been the results? Vermont has residents and businesses separating food waste. We have food donation early on, nearly tripled in our state. We've had since 2012, the number of food scrap haulers has more than tripled since the law passed. And food waste collection has grown every year since 2016. There was a study done, there was 2 studies done around 2018, a couple of years before the full food waste ban went into effect. And the data showed that about 40% of residential food waste was already coming out of the waste stream, either for feeding pets and backyard chickens, which we have a lot of in Vermont, composting at home, bringing it to a drop-off location. Remember I said any place that collects trash must have food scrap collection for those trash facilities. And then curbside haulers. We have a significant growth, especially in residential curbside food scrap haulers as a result of the July 1, 2020 ban. So we've been on a growth curve, and there's a couple of ways to show that. Let's go to the next slide. So in 2018, we started to survey our food scrap haulers to find out what towns they were offering services within. This map was drafted at the time because we kept getting new data. It was never permanent. Like the data was always old after we got it. So we estimated that I think this was about 60% of the state at the time in 2018, maybe a little bit less, had commercial food scrap collection services. And then you just look 1 year later at the expansion that haulers reported to us. And there is some planned expansion in there. Those lighter orange towns were planned expansion, but it's significant. You also can see some dots across the state. Those are composting or anaerobic digestion facilities located around the state. And you can see that we have a pretty good regional network of sites around the state for this material to go. And many of them were in place before the law was implemented, and some were even created afterwards. I don't know if it's visible, but in the center of the state towards the north, number 6 was a new facility that was sited after the law passed. So it's been significant growth. Let's go to the next slide. This is just an example of some of the municipal data we've received. After 2020, our Vermont municipalities and local governments reported back to us on what they had seen in terms of food waste coming into their facilities. Most of these are transfer stations, and the state data we don't actually get the data compiled and analyzed until about a year later. So we're still compiling that data right now for 2020. But as you can see, many of our municipalities reported a doubling or more in food waste coming in. And it's pretty evident in this data from the Addison County Solid Waste District. Next slide. So what have we been doing along the way to implement this new law and this initiative? We have had hundreds of stakeholder meetings. One of the first things we did was go out to the hauler community, the facilities, our public solid waste managers and private solid waste managers to explain what was required, what was coming, find out what, we did a survey of their needs. We worked to find funding to help support the greatest needs amongst our municipal sector. And we did a lot of education and outreach to the hospitality sector, hospitals, schools, food and grocery businesses, restaurant industry. And in 2020, in line up with the food waste ban, we launched the Scrap Food Waste campaign, which was dual purpose. Essentially, we're trying to reduce and prevent food waste with education and outreach and get people to compost the scraps. So we came up with the tagline, eat what you buy, compost the scraps. And we used real people. These are actual Vermonters going about their business. It's the farmer on the left, a restaurant chef, a child at school lunch, a parent packing lunches. So it was important for us to sort of have a diverse set of people all taking this action. Next slide. Here's our lessons learned. We've still been learning lessons, I'd say. It doesn't really end. It's a constant process. But the phased-in timing and the incentives the phase-in was meant to incentivize and build markets, and that has worked in our state. We believe that there was a lot of work that went ahead of that helped, but we needed to engage and listen with our stakeholders early and often, and it continues to this day. We, as a regulatory entity, need to ensure a level playing field. We needed a path forward for organics facilities to be permitted and to be established. And that's from everything from farm composting to anaerobic digesters. And we really prioritize outreach first and then targeted enforcement resources. We still are in the outreach and education realm because it really doesn't end. We've done a second launch of our scrap food waste campaign and are into our second version coming up of our business outreach. And I'd say use funding to incentivize the greatest needs. When we didn't have funding with this law that passed with it, we actually partnered with a foundation to help many of our municipal transfer stations scale up food scrap collection at a time when it was critical. So that's really the Vermont story, and I'm happy to take questions. And here's my contact info if anyone wants to reach me. And those symbols are downloadable at btrecycles.com. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Josh. It's always incredible to, having followed along with the progress in Vermont, just keep seeing all the amazing updates and data and how you keep building on the program. So thank you for joining. It's my pleasure to now introduce our next speaker, who is Sarah Feteih. Sarah works with the San Diego Food System Alliance as the program manager of the Wasted Food Prevention Program. In that role, Sarah manages Save the Food San Diego, which is a county-wide food waste consumer education campaign. And also she supports various cities and jurisdictions in San Diego County, California, by providing technical assistance on implementing wasted food solutions. Sarah, take it away.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for the introduction, Emily, and thank you to the USDA for inviting us to join this roundtable. Really excited to be here with all of you today to share a little bit about the San Diego Food System Alliance and the work that we're doing around food waste, as well as showcase one of our initiatives, the Save the Food San Diego Eco Challenge. Next slide, please. So I'll just start with a brief overview of our organization. The San Diego Food System Alliance is a nonprofit organization with a mission of cultivating a healthy, sustainable, and just food system in San Diego County. The Alliance really is a powerful network of over 150 multi-sector organizations across the food system, and we work to promote collaboration, influence policy, and catalyze transformation across the food system. And one of the food system issues that we particularly focus on is food waste, and we do that through our Wasted Food Prevention Program. And this is the program that I manage. And really the goal of the program is to provide comprehensive and specialized services to a variety of food waste stakeholders, which includes government agencies, businesses, nonprofit organizations, and residents as they take steps to reduce their food waste. And we kind of organize the work that we do in the program into these three key areas that you see here on the slide. So the first is network development, really building off of the Alliance's role as a convener. We bring together food waste stakeholders and organizations in collaborative spaces and conversations. We also provide technical assistance and supportive services to cities and jurisdictions as they're working to prepare for SB 1383, which is legislation here in the state of California that set up quantifiable targets for food waste reduction and is really significantly ramping up food recovery in our region. And lastly, consumer education, where the focus is educating residents across San Diego County about the issue of food waste, and then providing them with strategies for food waste prevention. And one of our consumer education programs that I'll be talking about today is our Save the Food San Diego Eco Challenge. Next slide, please. So the Eco Challenge was a fun social competition that used a customized online platform that combined food waste tracking challenges with consumer education. And to kind of explain that a little bit more, I've outlined the three primary goals that we had for the program. So the first was to engage residents and households as the target audience for these food waste tracking challenges. So we were directly engaging participants in tracking and recording their food waste 5 times during a 15-month period. And we wanted to focus specifically on households because we know that they are a unique audience for food waste intervention, particularly around long-term interventions that involve data collection around food waste. Our second goal was then to provide those participants with easy tips, tricks, and strategies for reducing their food waste at home. And we did that through a robust consumer education campaign. So throughout the 15-month program, we were providing our participants with a variety of materials on specific food waste prevention strategies. And primarily, we were focusing on meal planning, smart grocery shopping, zero waste cooking, and proper food storage. And then the last goal that we have was really quantifying food waste behavior change. And more specifically, we were really aiming to reduce food waste by 10% in our target population. So in other words, the question that we were trying to answer with the Eco Challenge was, if we have households actively engaged in tracking and recording their food waste, and if we provide them with specific strategies for food waste prevention, can that result in a measurable reduction in their food waste? Next slide, please. So if you're wondering what it looks like to have households track their food waste, I have some images here on the slide to kind of show you how that worked for our Eco Challenge program. So as you can see, we provided each participant with a high quality scale that they would use to actually weigh out their food waste. And then we fully customized the Eco Challenge website so that participants could actually log on and record their food waste directly on the website. So that screenshot that you see here on the left-hand side of the screen is kind of what that looked like for our participants. Next slide, please. So having mentioned these kind of 3 programmatic goals for the Eco Challenge, I really wanted to walk through the outcomes of our program with respect to each of those goals. And first, just starting off by looking at food waste reduction. So over the course of the program, we were able to recruit over 800 participants across 6 partner institutions as participants in the Eco Challenge program. Now, with our program being 15 months in length, as you might imagine, one of the challenges that we did face was just keeping participants engaged in tracking their food waste for that length of time. So of the 887 participants, we had around 391 that participated in the food waste tracking component of the program in some capacity. But among those program participants that completed the 5 food waste tracking periods, we found a 38% reduction in household level food waste, which was incredible and really far exceeded that 10% goal that we had initially set at the start of the program. And on the graph here on the slide with kind of that lighter blue line, you can see that consistent reduction in food waste levels as compared to baseline. You can also see this kind of interesting trend that we've highlighted here between January and May of 2020, where it looks like household level food waste actually increased slightly. And we know that January to May of 2020 actually directly corresponds to the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic and the shelter-in-place orders that went into effect here in California. So even though this was data that we didn't intend to collect at the start of the program, we think this could have some really interesting implications as we kind of continue to study the impact of the pandemic on household level food waste. Next slide, please. So then looking at our second goal of providing participants with food waste prevention strategies through consumer education, not only were we directly distributing materials to our participants through emails, newsletters, really cool refrigerator magnets, like the example that you see here on the slide, but participants actually also had the option to complete what we called food waste reduction actions on the Eco Challenge website. And by the end of the program, our participants had completed over 24,000 of those actions. And we also really leveraged social media as a communication channel to distribute our consumer education materials, especially after COVID-19 made it a little bit harder to reach our participants in person. And through those channels, we garnered over 460,000 social media impressions. Next slide, please. And lastly, we really wanted to evaluate what the impact of our program was on our participants beyond just the food waste reduction numbers. So after completing the program, we sent a post-evaluation survey to our participants to collect more of that qualitative data. And what we found was that 90% of our survey respondents reported that they had an increased awareness of food waste after participating in the Eco Challenge, and that 93% of them would actually recommend the program program to a friend. And this was just incredible for us to hear. And really one of the highlights of the Eco Challenge has been hearing the reflections and feedback from participants just on how their mindset around food waste has changed after being in the program, and the really specific and tangible changes that they've made to their habits or their daily lives. And I've shared some of those reflections on the screen for you all to take a look at. So even though the Eco Challenge itself was just a 15-month pilot program, this feedback really helps validate kind of the sustainability of our initiative, and knowing that participants can continue to use the skills and strategies that they've learned even after the end of the program. And more broadly, our experience with the Eco Challenge has informed and continues to inform the consumer education work that we're doing through our wasted food prevention program. Next slide, please. And with that, I'll conclude my presentation. Thank you so much for your time, and happy to take any questions during the Q&A portion.
Thank you so much, Sarah. That was wonderful. I love actually the pictures of people home tracking their food and what the waste looked like. It made it really, personal and look doable. I'm next going to introduce our next speaker, which is Wayne Hubbard. And Wayne is the Chief Executive Officer of ReLondon, which is the London Waste and Recycling Board, where he's responsible for helping London's boroughs to reduce waste and increase recycling rates, and accelerating the development of a low-carbon circular economy. Wayne has been working for the London Waste and Recycling Board since 2008, and prior to that, he was the head of waste policy at the Greater London Authority. Wayne, take it away.
Hi there, thanks. And thanks for inviting me to present to you today. I'll try and keep it quick and pithy. I think just to say that the London Waste and Recycling Board has rebranded ourselves to be called ReLondon. And ReLondon is a partnership between the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, and London's 33 municipalities. So complex city with 33 individual local authorities. All of those local authorities are responsible for collection, including food waste. Some of them are responsible for disposal, and groups of some of them are responsible for disposal. It's random and haphazard and complex administratively, and ReLondon sits in the middle to try and make some kind of sense of it. Next slide, please. So the next two slides actually are just there to give a baseline as from a UK perspective, or from an England perspective, UK perspective, how much food waste there is. And like every other speaker is going to say, it's a significant amount of the bin. And most of that food waste, certainly at the waste end, comes from households, from householders. Next slide, please. And then the next slide again, please. In London, it's about 1.5 million tons of food waste, and something like 6.3 million tons of food are produced to supply London, of which about 1.2 is lost before it even gets to London, which is quite a thing, isn't it? Next slide, please. So in this complex policy environment, we have a statutory London-wide plan that the Mayor of London has issued, called the London Environment Strategy, which includes policies for waste, and within that, policies for food, and some aspirations, for example, to reduce food waste per person by 50% by 2030, and steps therein. We have a London food strategy, which talks about not just food waste, but also healthy food and the contribution that food choices can make to climate change. And then each London municipality has to produce a reduction and recycling plan. So each London local authority will articulate within that plan how they intend to manage food and food waste in London. At the moment, 2/3 of London's boroughs offer food waste collections, mostly separately. Another 4 local authorities are currently trialling food waste, And then 5, I think, are in long-term contracts that make it difficult for them to introduce food waste currently. However, the mayor and subsequently national government have all now said that all local authorities in England must have food waste collections introduced over the next couple of years. So every householder should have a food waste collection. In London, we have a specific problem or issue around flats recycling. Flats is our way of saying apartments. And it's a particular problem in London. Something like 50% of Londoners live in apartments. And we're doing some trials now with South London Borough Lambeth to look at innovative ways to get hold of that food. And we're also quite interested in local anaerobic digestion solutions on site as well, where we have what we call housing estates. Okay, next slide, please. So we've at ReLondon carried out a number of schemes, projects aimed at reducing food waste. This one here, or these two here actually, are Trifocal and Food Wave. Food Wave is led by Milan, so Filippo might talk about this. These are European Union sponsored projects aimed predominantly at younger people. The Food Wave one is currently being developed now and will be targeting 15 to 35-year-olds, partly because actually our research says that whilst that age group are very aware of climate change issues, when it comes to action, there's a dissonance between what they say and what they do. Maybe that's a common theme, but it's a particular theme that we want to address at that younger age group. Next slide, please. We've also worked with a range of hospitality businesses on with a program called Food Save, and actually we worked with 170 hospitality businesses. And you can see from this slide, it was quite productive in terms of the amount of food waste that was prevented, but also it gave us a lot of information, which we produced a pack called Food That Doesn't Cost the Earth, and you can get hold of that on our website. And it's specifically targeted at hospitality establishments. Next slide, please. And I think really what I want to leave you with is, because of our ReLondon's place within the local government and regional government architecture within London, we can take a slightly different approach. So part of our organisation is one that helps businesses develop circular economy solutions. So these are small and medium enterprises, and we provide business help to allow them to develop their business. We don't provide them with environmental advice per se. We provide them with business help and advice to try and kind of beat what's sometimes called linear lock-in and get those circular businesses out there in the ecosystem. And you can see from this slide, this is a small example of that, and we've kind of got a matrix here of some of the businesses that we've worked with. So you can see there a load there on a food waste prevention. So we know, for example, provide artificial intelligence and good old-fashioned scales in kitchens so that you can measure and identify which food is wasted from plate scrapings and from food preparation. And that gives chefs a lot of information about how to tailor their ordering to make sure there's less food wasted. Going down, there's Toast Ale, who produce beer from surplus bread, and BioBean there in food waste upcycling, who produce burnable coffee logs from coffee grounds that that are produced by coffee shops in London. So I mean, there's loads of really good innovation here. We support it. Olio is worth a mention, a food sharing app that allows peer-to-peer sharing of surplus food. It's this kind of activity, I think, that is a definite value add that sits alongside the traditional behavior change messaging that municipalities tend to roll out to their residents and citizens. And then next slide, please. Finally, we're very interested in the relationship between the work that we do in terms of waste and resources and the circular economy, and developing that, and its relationship to mitigating the current climate emergency. And local authorities in the UK and in London are really interested in how they can provide messages to citizens to say this is the action that you're taking, and how that contributes to mitigating the climate emergency. And also, this gives us valuable insight into the leverage points and the particular bits along the supply chain where we can intervene to make the maximum impact. So we're working with the consultancy Circle Economy to develop a material flow analysis for food. We'll do this for other materials, but food is our first focus area. And we're launching the research in November at the COP in Glasgow. We'll be doing that in person, which will be a first since the pandemic. And already it's given us some really interesting insights into food loss and food waste. Some really interesting insights into how much food is lost before it even gets to London, and then how much food is further lost within the supply chain at the end. And then you won't be surprised actually to learn that the leverage points are around things like shifting towards a more healthy and sustainable diet. 5% of food by mass is meat, yet it represents something like 27% of the carbon impacts of our food. And then reducing food loss and food waste, and making better use of waste in combination with waste reduction if it becomes waste, better use of food if it becomes waste. So yeah, some fairly kind of logical and common sense actions, but now informed specifically by data at every point along the supply chain. So we can target our activities and our programs with much more precision because we have the data to allow us to do that. So it's in draft at the moment. We do have some really interesting insights, which I'm loath to share because they're still being worked on, but this report will be launched in November. So if you're interested, get in touch and I'll make sure that you have a link to where you can find that report. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Wayne. It was amazing to get this, perspective from across the pond and just hear everything that's going on in London. It's so inspiring, and I'm really looking forward to seeing the report in November. And we're going to stick with the kind of global speakers and move to our final speaker, who is Filippo Gavazzeni. Filippo is the head of the Milan Urban Food Policy Pact within the Mayor's Office of Milan, and he animates a network of more than 200 cities that are working together towards more sustainable food systems. He was previously the policy advisor of the Milan Vice Mayor and oversaw the implementation of the Milan food policy. And he contributed to the design of the policy there and also played a primary role during the COVID emergency to guarantee food security. Filippo, we're ready when you are.
Thank you very much for your kind invitation. Today, I would like to share with you what the Milan Urban Food Policy Pact is doing to help cities to work together on preventing food losses and waste. And also would like to give you an overview on what in particular Milan is doing in this field. So let me start by presenting the Pact. It's one of the most important heritage of the Expo Milan 2015, which aim was feeding the planet, energy for life. And it was launched by the mayor of Milan to other mayors that wanted to commit towards more sustainable urban food system. So the pact was signed and given to the UN Secretary General, and is a global commitment of mayors, as I said, and it is also a platform on which cities can work together and exchange knowledge and good practices. It's a platform with, let's say, a tangible approach on food system and also an holistic approach. So it consists of 37 recommended actions that are clustered in 6 categories that you can see in the slide. So, for example, just to give you some examples, so we start from the governance of the food system. For example, establishing a food council or a food policy department within the city administration, to sustainable diets and nutrition. So use all the drivers of the municipality to give healthy dietary guidelines or work on school canteen meals, for example. Then we have social and economic equity. So how food could be an entry point to involve, let's say, the fragile part of the citizens. Then we have food production and food supply and distribution. So how to promote the urban and peri-urban agriculture, and how to supply cities with healthy food, for example, through the local market. And lastly, how to prevent food losses and waste and manage the organic waste in a, let's say, sustainable and circular way. This is a glimpse of the Pact today. So after 5 years of activities, we have more than 200 cities from all over the world, more than 200 mayors that committed to work together. We have we meet on a regular basis, both at the regional and at a global level, and to work together. And here is, let's say, a picture of the last gatherings. And we have also a steering committee that is our governance body, in which the city of New Haven represents the North America. Lastly, I would like to share what is these 370 practices collected. So through the Milan Pact Awards, we are asking signatory cities to submit their food to their best practices, and an international jury of experts every year assess the degree of innovation of those policies and award the most innovative ones. The monetary prize is used to transfer the knowledge to other signatory cities. So thanks to the Milan Pact Awards, we know, for example, how many cities are working on food waste and what is their, let's say, different approaches to the issue. So we go, for example, from the city of Riga that is working on renovating and make the landfill, let's say, more sustainable by using the heat produced to the energy produced by the landfill to heat the green houses, to harvest fruit and vegetables in a, let's say, in a cold environment. Or we go to Bruges in Belgium, that is currently working on how to reduce food waste and food losses in hospitals. That is a very, let's say, peculiar infrastructure, in the sense that hospitals don't know about their patients, their clients for the day after, but they should have all the food potentially needed for the day after. But let me give you an overview of some actions undertaken by the city of Milan and its local food policy. An example is the model developed on food waste, the food waste hub. So we have opened 4 spaces of the administration that are now, let's say, our food hub, thanks to an agreement with the private sector union, that is Assolombarda. We have gathered all the say food companies that could be, for example, groceries or supermarkets, or companies that have also canteens for their employees, that every morning donate the food losses in these hubs, and in the afternoon, the food mixes that we have created inside those hubs are withdrawn by the NGOs for the people in need. All this mechanism is so also the logistic approach and the monitoring is done by the Politecnico, that is a University of Milan. Another driver that we use to promote the donation of food losses by private companies is the waste tax reduction that we have promoted. So we can reduce up to 20% of this tax to the company that donates food. So another important driver that we can that we use in Milan is are of course the school canteen. We have Milano Ristorazione, that is our public company for school canteen that every day provide 80,000 meals. And we have involved different schools with, let's say, different projects. Let me give you 3 examples. The first one is about food donation. So after the daily meal, an important NGO in Milan, let's say, withdrawn all the fruit and bread that is not eaten by students. And we can save 140 tons per year of food. Another interesting campaign is the I Don't Waste, Io Non Spreco campaign. So we, let's say, train students about the importance of not wasting, and also we provide a bag so they can start, let's say, at school, in the school canteens, to take home all the food that they don't eat at school. Lastly, and this is my let's say favorite, is frutta metà mattina, that could be translated as morning break with fruit. So we saw that usually children don't eat fruit as it is, let's say, the last part of the meal. So we decided to anticipate the delivery of fruit at the middle of the morning, in order to both educate students not to eat sugary snacks, but to eat fruit. And we noticed that in this way, the children arrive, let's say, hungrier in the canteens and eat more. We have in the pilot project seen that there is a reduction of quite 20% of food waste in the school that we have involved with this program. So this was, let's say, a general overview of the most important action that we are undertaking in Milan. Let me conclude by saying that we would like to involve more US cities within the Pact. The membership is free from charge, and once you join the Pact, you will, let's say, share your best practices and also learn from a group of like-minded cities, also on food waste, but in the other, let's say, urban food system dimension. So if you want to know more how to get involved, please contact the MUFPP Secretariat at the mail that you can see in the slide. Thank you so much for your invitation.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Filippo. So we have about 10 minutes, and I'm going to ask some questions to our panelists that came up on the Q&A. So I'm going to kind of go rapid fire if you guys can answer kind of quickly. One that I wanted to ask to Sarah, I saw a lot of questions about just some of the, if you can share like one or two of the kind of best tips or recipes or what ended up, being surprising because it actually made a real impact in consumers' homes.
Yeah, I saw a couple of those questions come through the chat and did my best to answer them through the Q&A. But of those 4 strategies that I outlined, just looking at the kind of the completion rate on the Eco Challenge website with those food reduction actions, meal planning and proper food storage stood out as kind of the most selected and most completed actions among our participants. So those look like they resonated with participants and kind of was in the area of being new information that they may not have been familiar with. And then the refrigerator magnets also, just as a mechanism for delivering the education, also were really well received by our participants. So highly encourage anyone who's looking into this, fridge magnets are the way to go.
Awesome, thanks, Sarah. All right, we're gonna go back. Todd, early on, there was a question that someone asked about just how you actually quantify progress on prevention. And again, I'm hammering a little on prevention because I think it's where we see the most benefit, but we've often, I've heard in other work we've done too, that it's harder to quantify. So, for individuals, for businesses, for local government, they can't say we prevented this much. I'm curious if you can talk about how you've been able to quantify that.
Thanks, Emily. It's a great question. It's a really difficult question because it's hard to quantify prevention. Unless you're following what happened with a particular activity years later to see if it made a difference, it's very difficult to quantify that. What we try to do is we survey our key stakeholders in Nashville. And again, we have a committee of about 25 leading the core organizations. We surveyed them quarterly, and we asked them the types of food waste prevention activities that they did in the last quarter. That can include signage posted, flyers distributed, talks or special webinars, formal lessons, news stories and articles, food waste audits, and so forth. And we try to understand what actions those key stakeholders took, so that we can reflect that back to them and say, look, we took this many actions. But what we try to do is, as a result of each action, we try to understand, did that particular group take a next step? We can't measure what the outcome is 10 years or 50 years later, unless we were part of a retrospective study or a study with a major university. But we can see if, as a result of our webinar or training, did they take a next step toward some sort of behavior change? So when we're quantifying how much prevention activities took place, and then what were the next steps as a result of participating in that particular prevention activity.
Thank you. That's great, Todd. I'm going to ask another question that was asked that I think is a great one. We're hearing today a lot of local examples and state as well from Vermont, but someone kind of asked, what is it that, are there barriers that the federal government can better address or ways that they can support these efforts? And I was curious, Josh, if you wanted to answer, and maybe Todd as well, like speak to that question and just to hear what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I've been trying to think about this question because states do a lot of things differently, and I think that's okay. But I think we touched on the methane generation from landfills, and I think it's something that, as we get serious about climate change, we have to get serious about not only the flaring, but also the fugitive emissions. We have a landfill operating in Vermont that has landfill gas capture, and it's a good thing to have. But it's simply putting organic material into a waste stream into the landfill is just not an effective way to manage that, and you're going to lose methane emissions through that process. So that type of regulation is helpful. But I think a lot of what's been done, actually, Emily, in your work, trying to bring up to the surface the food laws, the food donation laws, and how they can protect against liability and fear related to the giving food out for free and the the response you might get that's negative around that. There's still a stigma around it. And as the questions kind of alluded to, people are like, is it safe? How do we ensure safety? I mean, early on, we had stakeholders say to us, are we just going to see, basically food waste trying to be given to the poor? Nobody wants to see that. This is a real issue. And to the question before, that Todd was answering, Wayne was helping to answer about prevention. Getting solid waste people in the room and composting people in the room with food rescue is an uncomfortable place to be, because one's talking about food waste, the other was talking about wasted food, or, and they're not the same thing. So, but I will say that a lot came from that in our experience. By having the space to talk it out and to find areas of common ground, we were able to take those concerns and work with them constructively. So that's part of our stakeholder engagement that's been successful in our state, and it helps at the federal level. That kind of discussion is going on to help encourage and promote prevention as well as food donation.
I'll just add to that, Emily. I totally agree with Josh, especially about liability. And I think a lot of attention needs to be given to date labels. We haven't done enough of that here in the South, I think, and we're trying to promote that through the Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation, really educating about date labels and why they're important. But I think that needs to be given special attention. And I think the federal government, I think one of the number one things they can do is listen to cities. Listen to cities closely and see how the local progress can be made on all these fronts, because cities really are the front line against reducing wasted food.
All right, thank you guys both. I also am with you on, date labels, liability, like these are things we've worked on for a while. I'd love to see progress. There's a lot of talk about prevention. And of course, as we look at the climate impacts of food waste and the most beneficial environmental uses of food, we'll really want to focus on preventing more and keeping food higher in that hierarchy. And I wanted to ask a couple of our panelists just to comment on how you can ensure more focus on prevention, or perhaps iterate in your programming to refocus on that if it's not happening. And I thought perhaps Josh and Wayne could both give a response to that question. Josh, go ahead if you want to start, and then.
Actually, I think Wayne has some better things to say, but I will just start with this point as Wayne's getting ready, because I'm very interested to hear what Wayne has to say too. I will say this, that in the years that I've spent working with businesses and institutions on food waste composting and separation, and I've had the same dialogue with the Center for Eco Technologies that does a decent amount of this work as well. That it's sometimes you work from the lower level of the hierarchy up. And I basically feel that with my other colleagues in the food waste world, I don't believe that composting and prevention are mutually exclusive, or that they can't coexist. I actually believe they can. And I've found that when you get, let's say, a restaurant composting, they suddenly see how much they're wasting when they didn't before. And we've seen that with resorts, we've seen that with nursing homes. And so they start to then work up the hierarchy at prevention, because the issue wasn't as transparent to them before. Because when waste is an afterthought, generally speaking, we all want it to go away. We don't really want to have to worry about it. We don't, what is recyclable, what is not? Oh, it's exhausting. So they just want it to go away until they see it as a separate material. Then it becomes a priority to start not wasting the steaks that went bad, or whatever the case may be. So I'll turn it over to Wayne here, though.
Sorry, unfortunately, my internet broke up at that point, so that's why I was late coming on. Could you just repeat the question very quickly? Sorry.
All right, no problem, Wayne. It was asking about if you're working on a program, and how do you kind of reframe to make sure prevention is more prioritized? For example, if you see that you're diverting a lot of food waste, but you want to kind of get prevention to happen higher up in the chain.
Yeah, I mean, traditionally, you would run lots of behavior change campaign stuff, and I think it was mentioned by Sarah, things like shopping lists, freezing cheese, You know, all these kind of activities, you give householders and citizens hints and tips, you know, saving money. We saw a dramatic reduction in food waste since 2008 when the crash happened, as people were, you know, trying to be more efficient and save money. Then that never really got back to the pre-2008 levels in terms of waste. So those habits stuck, and subsequently found it difficult to continue to make that reduction. So what we at ReLondon have done is try to produce and provide citizens and businesses with other tools that are themselves provided by the private sector, so we can you know, give the behavior change messaging as hygiene, if you like, around the issue, but actually provide citizens with tools like Olio, where you can share food if you've got excess food. And then businesses, we've got one called Alicia, which goes around artisan bakeries around London's markets, collects the food that's not sold at the end of the day and serves it up for breakfasts, corporate breakfasts the next day. You know, these kind of great ideas, support those businesses. So, you know, to use a food term, you bake in reduction into the ecosystem. It's quite hard because, you know, the whole system is incentivized to create waste, unfortunately. But we are now living, aren't we, in an age where the economy that we live in now is not normal, and the future is going to be quite different in terms of its economy. So all of us who are having these conversations are the future, and all of those people who are kind of stuck in their wasteful ways, that's the past, and that will increasingly, I think, be seen as wasteful. It will be taxed against, and it will be regarded quite rightly as unacceptable. So I think we're all part of that movement. So I would suggest behavior change is hygiene, and then we provide citizens with tools, and we use things like directories to help citizens get hold of those tools and provide them with knowledge so they can take positive action.
Great. All right. Thank you so much, Josh and Wayne. I'm going to try to squeeze in one more question, and it is, we had some questions about just how you recommend prioritizing when an area is just starting out. So, you know, hearing from these speakers, you have taken so many steps. It's amazing to see the progress. I'm going to ask, actually, I think to start, Filippo and Wayne, just if you were starting in a new city or new area, is it better to focus first on large food waste sources like institutions and grocery stores? Is it better to start with households? If you can tell people, like, what would you say is the first 1 or 2 steps you would take? And then after that, we'll wrap up.
Just to jump in first, I mean, I think you have to start with households, because the evidence suggests, from a waste perspective at least, that's where the majority of waste comes from. I suspect as you get more sophisticated, you would start to want to look up the supply chain, or maybe down the supply chain towards production. But, you know, we're not there yet, but definitely start with households, definitely start with messaging, and then work your way out like an onion, you know, to reach different levels of the supply chain.
That's really helpful, Wayne. Filippo, if we have you, would you like to give go ahead, Filippo.
Yes. Okay. So I think that, these cities, let me stress that, as Todd said, we are the forefront on this challenge. So what I, let's say, recommend is to start, let's say, monitoring and assess potential impact on the, let's say, food system drivers that the municipality have. So, for example, like the school canteen or the public procurement or of hospitals, and also the, for example, it could be also the municipal company for let's say, withdrawing organic waste. So to start with those, let's say, food infrastructure that can have a systemic, let's say, impact on the food system, as this power are within, let's say, the administrations, the local administrations.
Thank you. That was wonderful. And it sounds too, I mean, remembering that all people are consumers. So whether you're starting with households or schools and educating, you know, the business leaders, political leaders are also consumers. They will also be the recipients of that information. So I know it's my job now to kind of wrap up and give a huge thank you to our speakers, who are all amazing and are just really inspirational leaders. And thanks to USDA for hosting, and also EPA and FDA, who also were part of putting this together. You can see here, there are some great links for the web pages of USDA, EPA, and FDA, where you can access more information on their efforts to reduce food loss and waste. It was a real pleasure to be here and to be part of this great conversation, and I hope everyone has a great rest of your day.